Welcome to today's session on debugging and testing with Bixby Developer Studio. My name is Boughner. I'm a member of the team that creates Bixby Developer Studio for you. And I work at Viv Labs, which is a subsidiary of Samsung. Today, we're going to go on a journey. We're going to say we've been given a capsule. It's been dropped in our laps. That's almost done, but not quite perfectly done. There's going to be some bugs in it. We're going to figure out what those are. First, we're going to look at it with Bixby Developer Studio to examine the capsule itself, figure out what it's made of, how it works. We'll use the debugger to find answers to some difficult questions. And we'll make some tests. We call them stories. Finally, we'll test it on this Note 9 right here. Show you how you can test your capsule on a device. So first off, let's talk about Bixby Developer Studio for just a moment to review it. It's a desktop application that you can use on Windows, Linux, or Mac. And we use it to create voice assistant capsules. We call them capsules. You edit local files on your laptop, and they get synced with Bixby platform in the cloud. Because they're synced with Bixby, we can simulate what happens on the capsule for you within Bixby Developer Studio. You'll define the concepts and actions that your capsule can do, and in addition, you can train the capsules to recognize the natural language that they need to know about. We can use the debugger to look and see what's going wrong with it when there are problems, and we can write automated tests. Also, we can create a submission that we can use for on-device testing or submitting it to the marketplace. All right, so we're going to talk a little about this capsule that we've been handed. It's called Movie Agent. It helps people choose a movie. It can take inputs of a person that's involved in making the movie, or a genre of the movie, or a release date time frame. Connects to a real REST API on the cloud called the movie database. So let's dig in and look at the code for this capsule. So this is Bixby Developer Studio. Here, let me make it a little bit bigger. I've already loaded the capsule in here. Any capsule folder is going to be indicated that it is such by having a file in it called capsule.bxb. So let's look at this file first. The capsule.bxb file contains the ID of the capsule. In this case, I think it starts as playground.movieagent, but I've changed it to use my organization name. In the Bixby Developer Center, our website, you can register your organization. Now, I've done this already so that later on in the process, when I want to create a submission for testing on the device, we're ready to do so. This capsule.bxb file also specifies the targets that this capsule is aimed at, which devices and languages. For simplicity, you've just got one target here right now. Also, other capsules it imports. These are library capsules. In particular, the viv.time capsule is useful at helping you figure out date-time intervals, which we're going to be using in this capsule. And these runtime flags are required at the bottom. So whenever I go to investigate a capsule, first things I look at is the endpoints file. The endpoints file tells us all of the actions that the capsule can take and where the JavaScript is located for those actions. So to find a movie, for example, this action is called find movie, takes three kinds of inputs: an expression for the time and date, a person involved in the movie, and a genre. And then it says there's local JavaScript here in the capsule in findmovie.js that we're going to look at. That's going to be under the code folder. Before we look in there, actually, I want to look at find movie, the action. That's going to be under models. So here's all the actions. We're going to start with find movie. All right, so this is a definition that Bixby uses to understand what a find movie action means. It's a search. It collects three kinds of inputs: the release date, person, genre. Here it looks like the default is if you don't specify any of those inputs, it'll ask you one of these genres. And then it has an output type of movie. Movie is another Bixby concept, so there should be a file for it here. All right, a movie contains everything about a movie. This is a bunch of properties, a lot like a JavaScript object would have. All right, so let's go look at the code. Under the code folder, we'll find that findmovie.js file that was talked about in the endpoints file. Looks like it requires a couple of other JavaScript files. And here's a function for findmovie, takes those 3 inputs, discovers a list of movies by calling this function here, discover movie, and then parses the movies that are received. So let's go look in the tmdb.js file. Discover movie. There's some code we can recognize. Looks like it understands the URL. It collects an API key together with the people and the genre and the time date expression, puts them in a JavaScript object, hands it to http.getURL. This is provided by Bixby to make such REST API calls like this. And then this will return the response, which is probably a list of movies. Okay, what else can we figure out about this capsule? There's a folder full of views. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the views in this session, but these are how Bixby lays out the results when you see it on a phone. We're going to have a session about Bixby views this afternoon. There's training. Under English here, I'll look at the training. So for a goal of movie, looks like there are 26 different training entries. So a training entry will tell you that the goal of movie can be found by a user saying something like this, and it'll tag this part of their sentence as the time date expression, or if they can say find movies with someone in them, be like that, or they could just say find a movie, not provide any inputs at all. Okay, so let's try one of these. If we go over here, there's a button for opening the simulator. This will show us what things look like when we run them in a Bixby capsule. So I'm going to put find a science fiction movie.
Here are a few science fiction movies.
All right, so that shows you what the capsule does. Let's just review what we learned about the capsule so far. Okay, so we've been handed the movie agent capsule. We understand so far that if you say find a movie, the goal will be the movie concept. And that goal is going to take 3 kinds of inputs: a person name, release date, genre. And the action it's going to make happen is the find movie action. We saw the endpoint file described where the JavaScript for that could be found. And there's a bunch of files for views to show how it gets laid out. So let's try to figure out a few more difficult questions about the capsule that we can find out with the debugger. The debugger comes up in a separate window, and you can call it after you've used the simulator. It'll analyze what happens between the time the user says find a movie and Bixby displays the output. Programming for Bixby isn't quite the same as writing in a regular language. Instead of writing exactly what code will happen, you create these concepts and actions that Bixby will choose from to complete the goal that you're trying to accomplish. So we'll use the debugger to show how this happens, how Bixby comes up with its plan. Let's have a look. All right, so we've run the simulator. There's a button up here with looks like a little bug. This opens the debugger. So it'll open it for this particular step. Now we see what we've got here is the plan. The user input was provided at the top. From that we got the movie genre. We said science fiction. There were 2 other optional inputs, the person name and the time frame. Those weren't provided. Those all went into the find movie action, and it produced a list of movies, which was the goal, the overall goal. This is what it looks like if it works. So let's break something and see what happens. We'll go in the code here, and we'll mess up the URL. So this was the URL here. If we change the URL so it's incorrect and run this in the simulator again, it's not going to work. Let's try it.
I ran into a problem.
Okay. So let's open the debugger again and have a look. Oh my, the find movie function couldn't succeed. That's kind of what we expected to happen. It had a 404. So can we dig into that a little more? We look at the actions here, the find movie action. We can dig in here. We can find the function, find movie. And we can look at the requests it made. Here's the URL it used. If that doesn't tip us off, we can look at the options that were provided, and then we can look at the response that came back from the REST API service. Well, here it says the resource could not be found. So this would lead us to believe that, okay, we messed up the URL. We've got to fix that. So let's go back and fix that real quick. There we go. Run it again.
Here are a few science fiction movies.
Go back to the debugger. Now everything looks good. If we click on the request again, we'll see a successful request. Looks like that. There's a convenient parsed version of it up here. So here's what we got back from the API, a page with all the results in it. Great. So what if we wanted to put a console log into our JavaScript code? Let's see. I actually put one in here already on this line. To include a console log in your capsule, you need to require the console module up here. All right, so that was in there already, so it must have been in the output. In the debugger, oh, here it is, under the function. The logs are listed. Here's our release date time expression from that console log. It was undefined because we didn't have one. So let's add one and see if we can change what this log outputs. We'll go in the simulator and we'll ask for movies that came from 1999. Find a movie from 1999.
Here are a few science fiction movies released in 1999.
All right, so if we go back to the debugger, looks like our log output includes a date interval with an end date and a start date, the end of 1999 and the beginning of 1999. That's great. Console log is nice, convenient, but couldn't Bixby have told us that information some other way already? Do we really have to log it? As it turns out, we can find that out. If you click on Find Movie, it shows you, not only does it show you all the results, but it shows you the inputs as well. So here we have the inputs were a genre and a release date, time expression, date interval. Awesome. It's all there. Where did it come from? It came from the viv.time library capsule up here. If we want to see what's happening inside of here, then we have to expand it. That's up here. It was an imported capsule, so we're going to say show the import executions. That makes our graph a lot bigger. All that is what the viv.time capsule did. Let's look at some pieces of it. Here's where it figured out the year was 1999. Here's where it figured out it made to make a time interval, and finally a expression, a date time expression, and pass it into find movie down here. All right, once we understand that, we could hide those again. All right, let's see. Let's try something that we know won't work. What if we try to find a movie from 2030? Don't think there's been any released yet.
I couldn't find any movies released in 2030. Blarg, blarg, blarg.
Who left that in there? This capsule's not finished yet. How do we find out where this dialogue came from? First, it says it's searching for movies, and then it says I can't find any. Okay, so if we go back over here, we can look at the conversation. Let me make this a little bit bigger. The conversation input includes the natural language that the user said. Now look, find a movie from 2030. It looks like, okay, that's good. What I really want is the output dialog. Here we go. Now, there's a lot of duplication here, and the reason for that is because sometimes it shows you the channel for text, and sometimes it shows you the channel for speech. So the text is what shows up on the display of your phone. The speech is what it says to you. In this case, it looks like searching for movies came up first, and down here you see that says it's system generated. So that's not text that anybody put in for us. If we wanted to provide that text, we would need to provide a dialog file for the progress mode of dialog. So that's one way to find where when you need to add new dialog. But in this case, we want to see how did this dialog get generated with the blarg, blarg, blarg in it. Thank you very much. All right, so it looks like it comes from two different files. The first file is a dialog file for movie no result. So we can click here and go right to that file. Here's a dialog file. It matches when the goal is a movie, and the output is coming from a find movie action. Let's see. There's no text in here, but it calls a macro called movie no result. Back in the debugger, that's the other file. This is the macro it came from. It comes from a file called template macro defs. So let's go there. All right, movie no result. I can do this actually. Here we are. All right, so looks like this text, oh, there's your blarg, blarg, blarg right there. Somebody left this little, hopefully it was just a debugging message. And I might have done this myself earlier. Oh. Anyway, it's fixed now. All right, so if we run it again, should be fine.
I couldn't find any movies released in 2030.
There we go. All right, let's review what we've learned about the debugger. So the debugger is useful for viewing the plan that Bixby came up with between the time the user said, this is what I want, and Bixby decided, this is what you get. We got to see what inputs went into the JavaScript functions that we created. We can examine the REST APIs to and from our service. We can look at console logs we might have added to the code. And finally, we can find out where dialog came from. All right, so we've got the capsule in pretty good shape now. Let's make some tests. We call these tests stories. In Developer Studio, we can write a bunch of stories that prove a capsule works, and then we can run them again and again as regression tests in order to make sure the capsule is still working every time we release a new version of it. So we're going to discover a problem, and we're going to write a test first and before we fixed it, kind of like a test-driven development kind of methodology, if you want to use that. All right, let's go back. So the nice thing about writing stories with Bixby Developer Studio is that you can start right from the simulator and do your testing there as if you were testing it by hand, and then save off the contents of that as a story. There's a couple of things we need to do to prepare. One of those things is we need to go to the user profile here and turn off selection learning. Looks like I've already turned it off. This starts on by default, so we want to make sure it's off. And the reason for that is Bixby tends to remember things that you've chosen in the past. We call it selection learning. Stories are going to be run over and over again as tests, so we want those to run the same way every time. We don't want Bixby to remember things for us. So we turn this off. And the other thing we need to do is go over here and show the steps. Now over here on the right, we'll see a history of the steps that we provide in the simulator when we're going through to create our test. All right, what are we going to do for a test? Well, let me show you the hints file. Whenever you're creating a capsule, there should be a file that contains hints. Let's close our other files. Okay, So the hints file tells the user, this is the kind of thing you can do with the capsule, and these will show up in the marketplace when they look at the capsules. I've added a couple hints at the end here to test looking for a movie with a release time frame and an actor. In this case, find a 2017 movie with this actor, and in the next case, what movies did this actor work on in 2017? I want to make sure both of those work. So I'll copy this. We'll try it out in the simulator. Okay.
Here are a few movies released in 2017 with Chris Hemsworth.
Okay, so that's the first step, and you see over on the right, it showed us this step. Let's take one more step and pick a movie. All right, there's 2 steps. Great, we'll export this as a story by using this button at the bottom right. So let's see, it offers us a way to save the story, find a 2017 movie. We'll label this -1, so we can tell these 2 stories apart once we're done making them. So we save this. It creates a new folder for the story, and it runs the story. Here's the 2 steps in the story. You can see the first step had this spoken response. I'm going to copy that text, and the reason I want to do that is I'm going to make an assertion that says every time this story runs, this text should be the same. If this is still working, that will be true. So I add an assertion, this button here. It asks me for a file name. I can use anything. I'll say Chris. Now we can use a template to help us here. We don't have to write all the code in this test. This test is kind of like a Jest or Mocha test. It'll contain code in JavaScript you can write yourself, but fortunately we don't have to write it all. We can do a dialog template, and this contains a lot of the code we need. Here's the code. It describes the name of the test, and it has a test case. The test should be matching this text. So I paste the text here I want. Okay. So now I have an assertion to make sure this step in the story always has that text. So let's run the test. If we run it live, it'll run against the REST API on the cloud. All right, great. The assertion down here is green. It passed the test. It matched. If we dig in here, we can see that it matched the text we were expecting. Great, this first hint works. We're so happy. I'm done with that one. Let's go check the other one. This one's going to reverse the 2. What movies did Chris Hemsworth work on in 2017? Okay, back to the simulator to try this out. We reset. We'll paste it in here and see what happens.
Here are a few movies released in 2017.
Well, this is pretty and all, but I'm a little disappointed because Chris Hemsworth is not mentioned in the text up here. And he's not necessarily in the Star Wars movie. Okay, so this is the wrong output. Let's create a story out of it anyway. We'll call this -2 so we can recognize them more easily. All right, so the response here was a little different. This is not the same response as we got in the first test. The first one had this response, and this is the response we wish the second one had. Let me copy it. I'm going to go to the second test, create an assertion saying that the text should be what we're expecting. Here we go, Chris2. You can call the JavaScript file. Once again, it's a dialog template. Okay. We were expecting this text. All right, let's go run our test again, see what happens. All right, so it failed. The assertion failed. This text didn't match. If we click on this, it'll actually give us details. It shows us what the text was and what we expected it to be. All right, so now a challenge is to fix this capsule so this actually works and this test will pass. So what is wrong with this? Why did it fail? Well, in this story, you also have access to the debugger. If you hit the debug button up here, it'll take you to the debugger for this step that's selected. So let's go look at it. All right. The conversation input is here. This is what we said. What movies did Chris Hemsworth work on in 2017? Oh, looks like I didn't paste the W in there. It's kind of cool. It still figured out the gist of what was said. But it only figured out the time date expression here. It didn't figure out that Chris Hemsworth was an actor or a person that worked on the movie. So something about this natural language between what movies did someone work on at some time doesn't look like it understood that. Usually that's a situation where the training needs to be improved. And we can confirm this by going to look at the training we already have for this situation. So over to the training panel. We'll have a look for the goal of movie, and we'll say the value for person name is being provided, and the value for time, date time expression. Let me make this a little bigger. Okay, so we're going to search on that. Looks like we've only got 4 things that match for that. We have what movies did blank star in the last blank. We've got find movies released in blank, featuring blank, and what was the 2001 movie with this person, okay? What we really needed was something that said, what movies did so-and-so work on during a certain time frame? It looks like this one here that's been disabled is actually what we want. How did this get disabled? I have no idea. I'm going to have to re-enable it to fix it. So now it understands that if you say, what movies did blank work on, that blank is a person, and the date time expression comes after work on. All right, so we compile a new NL model, which should fix the problem. So if we go back and run our test again, this time, I hope it passes. And there you go. The assertion passed this time. All right, so our second test is working now. We don't have 2 steps in it like we do for the other test. We want a second step. So how do we add another step to this test now that it works? This add button will open the simulator again and set it up in the situation where we're at after the first step so we can add more steps. Let's try that out. Okay, it sets up the simulator. We're in story mode. And it looks like we could save or cancel as soon as we're done here. Well, we'll choose a movie as our second step and save this. It'll update the story, giving it a second step. And great, it's working. Another feature we have for stories is there's a whole dashboard that shows you all the stories. If you look over here, we can look at all of our stories, and we can see both of our stories are successful now. Earlier, it said one was failed and one was successful. Now we see them both run. And we can run them all again right here to see them run again and make sure they're all successful. So this is a step you could take before you release your capsule again with some new updates. You could make sure that everything that it used to do still works the same as it should. All right, let's review what we learned about making automated tests. Okay, so to make stories, you start in the simulator and you do what you would normally do there. Try writing some things there and then exporting that story out of the simulator and into a story folder where you can rerun it as many times as you want and you return to the simulator to add more steps. Okay, now we come to the exciting part. We're going to try to get it working, our capsule working on a device. So, why would we do that? Well, it gives you the feeling of having the device in your hand. This is how it's going to feel when the user uses this capsule. There are a few behaviors that are a little different on the device. The mic will stay open when you say hi Bixby to it, and it'll respond. The steps I'm going to go through now to show you this, they're all documented on bixbydevelopers.com, so you don't have to memorize this sequence that I'm going to go through. And we'll put the movie agent capsule right on the phone. Okay. Let's see here. Okay. So here's what's on the phone. This is the home page for Bixby. Let's see. To set up the device for development mode, there are some steps that we need to take on the device itself. We've got to go to the settings. And in the settings, we're looking for developer options. Now, initially, developer options doesn't show here. You have to go to About Bixby Voice and press and hold the version number for 5 seconds. And when you let go, it'll say developer options activated. And when you go back, you'll be able to see the developer options. Once we go there, we are presented with the option to do on-device testing. It'll make us log in using the same account we used when we logged into Bixby Developer Studio early on when you first installed it. So we just use the same one again. And let's see, oh great, so on-device testing. We turn it on. We need a revision ID. Where do we get a revision ID? Well, let me show you. Okay, we've got to create a revision that we can test on the device. To do this, we use Bixby Studio. And let's clear all these guys. The button we want is the submissions button down here. Press on this, it opens a new tab for making submissions. These are submissions I've made in the past while practicing for this presentation. I'm going to create a new submission just for us. So there's two kinds of submission, a public and a private submission. The public submission is good when you're about to release to the marketplace. You've got to do one of those in order to submit it. Private submissions are great for creating over and over again for testing on devices. So let's do a private submission. We've got to select our capsule, and we can put anything here, test on device. Only we will be able to see this submission. So we submit the capsule. In a moment, it'll finish creating the submission. Here we go. So there's a bunch of logs here that come out. These are interesting to talk about your natural language training. We're actually going to have a session on natural language training right after this one. So stay tuned for that, and you see more, understand more about that. What we need for on-device testing right now is this revision ID right here. That's the revision ID that we need to put in on the phone. I'm going to copy it. And because I'm using Visor to display what's on my phone, I can cheat here and paste it right in there. Okay, so revision IDs in the phone. We hit apply. Great. So now what we're seeing in the phone is only our capsule. If we go back to the home page, anything we tell Bixby at this point is going to be talking only to our capsule. So we don't have to use our name dispatch here. We can test without it. Hi, Bixby. Hi, Bixby. This happened the other day because the speakers are a little bit difficult on it. Let's start going, let's see, try it again here. I'm going to close it. Hi, Bixby. Oh, good idea. Find a movie. Oh, yeah. Let's try that again.
Highlighted genre is comedy.
Science fiction.
Which genre are you in the mood for? Today's highlighted genre is comedy.
Animation.
Here are a few animation movies. My top recommendation is The Lion King. Would you like to hear a summary for this movie?
No.
Another recommendation is Cars. Would you like to hear a summary for this movie?
Yes. Yes.
Lightning McQueen, a hotshot rookie race.
Okay, I'm going to cut it off there. But you get the idea. So one of the things that you can test on the device is its response when the mic is open and you get to talk back to it. The hands-on behavior for a capsule is a little different than the behavior when someone types into it. And they're obviously using the display. So we have a session about making sure your hands-free mode works well. It can do things like read lists to you and so forth. Another difference that you may have noticed on here is this. On the bottom, it shows you which capsule you're locked into. So when you talk to Bixby normally, and there's lots of capsules, you start talking to a capsule, it'll lock into the one that it's using now, and you can use the conversation drivers on the bottom. Those come from your code as well. All right. Let's talk a little bit about what we've learned about on-device testing. So, to summarize, you need to make a private submission in Bixby Studio in order to test on the device, and you need the revision ID. You'll put the device in developer mode, enter the revision ID, and then you can test your capsule on the device. If you find any problems or things you want to change, you change them to Bixby Studio, you create another revision, and you go through the cycle again. All right, so I've made it through all the major sections. Let's talk about what we've learned today. We were handed a capsule we didn't know anything about to begin with. We used Bixby Developer Studio to examine it, to look at how it works, try it out. We can answer difficult questions using the debugger. We can create automated tests using stories, and we can test it on a device to see how well it works right in your hand, just the experience of it. So those are the major categories we covered. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? I think we got about 5 or 10 minutes. Yes? Yes. Could you stand up at the microphone there in the middle? Thanks.
So when you were doing the on-device testing, and you said science fiction, and it repeated the prompt, can you use the debugger to see why that happened and it didn't pick up on science fiction?
We don't have on-device debugging yet. It's something that we're still working on.
Okay.
So you would need to go into the Bixby Studio and try the same situation there, and then you could open the debugger.
Yeah, that's a follow-up. So for the simulator, you have you can type it in, and I saw that you can press space to enable the mic.
Yes.
Can you feed it recorded audio?
Yeah, you can talk to it. So if we...
No, I mean, like if you have a MP4 saved with the utterance you're trying to test, can you feed that?
If you have a recording, I suppose you could. When we use the mic here for entering things in the simulator, it uses the microphone on your laptop. So if I say something to it like, find a movie, then
Which genre are you in the mood for?
you can test that your automatic speech recognition is going to work for you there. Did that answer your question?
So I already have the recording saved, like a list of recordings that I want to test.
Okay.
And I want to create stories with them and feed them
Okay.
into the...
If you've got audio recordings, you could feed them to your laptop this way with the simulator and then export them to stories.
Should we just play them?
One after another? No, it won't work that way. Not quite so easy. You'd have to get involved with the process.
Okay.
But once you've created the stories, then you could run those over and over again.
But I guess what I'm asking is like, for Google Assistant, there's a method called audio input.
Oh, okay.
So I don't know if you guys had something similar like that for Bixby.
As far as I know, we don't have anything similar yet.
Thank you.
Great, thank you very much for your questions. Any more questions? All right, there's a couple more things I'd like to leave you with then. We have another session right after this one about natural language training. And after that, Bixby Views, how to make the output look nice on all the devices. And tomorrow we have sessions about working on the hands-free behavior, all the different devices that you can use with Bixby now, the Bixby Developer Center, how you submit your capsules to the marketplace, and finally Bixby Building Blocks, which is tips and tricks to create a more powerful experience with Bixby. And I'd like to remind you that we have a competition going on right now, so if you write a capsule, you can earn prizes. And I think the website you want to go to is bixbydevjam.com.